Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week is part 2 of my chat with Bill M., the Magister from the Church of Satan. Now, if you're only just tuning in and you haven't listened to part 1, be sure to go back and check that out before listening to this one, because part 1 explains a lot of the misconceptions around the church, and they don't do blood sacrifices and kill goats or anything, or even actually worship the devil, because they don't believe the devil or any sort of supernatural deities in that sense actually exist. So really, if you haven't listened to that already, go back to part 1 and check that out first. So in this part, we sort of continue our conversation about what we were talking about previously, just general questions about the Church of Satan and things. But in this one specifically, we go on about afterlife, consciousness, including artificial intelligence. And we talk about the misconceptions around Aleister Crowley and how people just hate being wrong, closed-minded intellectuals, the satanic sins, numerology, Wiccans, witches, and Wicca, the religion. We speak very briefly about Bill M. actually was on the BBC. He did interview with them a little while back, so we go into that. And loads of other things. So, if you liked part 1, you're sure to like this part as well, because Bill is an incredibly intelligent individual. He's a great person to chat to, and it's just good to try and clear up a lot of the misconceptions surrounding a seemingly harmless religion. So, there we are. Just before the chat starts, we've got a promo for the Breakdown from the Couch podcast. Be sure to check those guys out. I've included a link in the description. And then after the full chat, it will be me doing the usual. So that being talking about what's coming up in the following episodes, giving more information, all that sort of tomfoolery. So yeah, be sure to like us on all the social media places, share this with your friends if you think it's enjoyable, and all that usual tomfoolery. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys, and I'll talk to you all at the end.
Hey everybody, I'm Laura.
And I'm Nikki.
And we're your hostess with the mostest with Breakdown from the Couch.
Have you ever watched a movie and loved it? Hated it? Realized you haven't seen it in ages and wonder if it's still what you remember? The characters, the plots, the twists and turns. Well, then you'll feel right at home with us at Breakdown from the Couch.
That's right. It has to be one of the missing pieces of the puzzle known as life, which is why we're on this mission together. My best friend and I are going to be bringing you weekly episodes full of movie breakdowns. Movies that you'll be able to find on streaming services so you can pull them and watch them right along with us. Well, not right along with us. The podcast isn't going to be that long. Who do you think we are, Peter Jackson?
I wish we had his Lord of the Rings budget, but we will take you on a journey with us as we review some of our most favorite or most hated movies. And then we'll be breaking down these cinematic masterpieces scene by scene, all from the comfort of our very own couch.
Absolutely, so please give us a listen. Our first episode is set for launch January 1st, 2019. We'll release new episodes every Tuesday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram for extra content. Catch us on your favorite podcast platforms.
Once again, I'm Nikki.
And I'm Laura.
And we'll talk soon on Breakdown from the Couch.
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. Even though you're atheist, the beliefs when it comes to sort of deities and things are atheist. What life after death, for example, is it widespread that to be a Satanist you have to believe in the atheist approach, which is you die, you're gone, that's it, or is it more down to interpretation? So I wondered if you have different beliefs to what happens when you die, and if the church accepts other things.
Well, essentially, no. I would point out, though, that atheist, the term itself, really doesn't mean anything more than not believing in a deity. Mm. So it is technically possible to be an atheist who believes in an afterlife, for example, because an afterlife isn't a deity. Mm-hmm. Having said that, we're very clear that there's no heaven and hell, that these are inventions of humans, made to either scare people or give people some kind of empty sense of solace. We don't necessarily rule out all possibilities of an afterlife, but it kind of begs the question, well, why? What rational reason would you have to believe that in the first place? Even if we assume that there was such a thing as an afterlife, that still doesn't change the fact that this is your life here and now, and you should be living this to the fullest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. My philosophy is my philosophy is basically one thing that I've spoken to a couple of religious individuals on the show and non-religious individuals, and I think the one thing that everyone has to agree on is there is at least one life. That's the empirical fact we all know for sure. It's like no one can argue we have at least one life. Now, if you want to be a Hindu and believe in reincarnation, or if you believe in heaven and hell, it's different things, but it's that one life, and that's the most important thing, and that's what your religion, I feel, highlights.
Yeah, because it is pretty much the antithesis of other spiritual religions that say something better is to be in the afterlife, or that you have to spend this life self-sacrificing and all this and not enjoy things, and that you somehow become a superior spiritual being, by following that sort of degrading, set of circumstances.
Yeah, and it's ironic in that sort of thing of the idea it's meant to be, using Christianity again as an example, trying to be this thing where you're like, oh, I'm a really good person, I do all these nice things. It's like, well, what I've said for a while now is if you don't believe in an afterlife and you do nice things, you're a more moral person than a Christian. Because the Christians believe they're going to get rewarded. Whereas, for example, yourself and myself, if I do something nice or you do, it's because we want that person's experience to be less shit. We're not doing it because we think we're going to get some sort of reward afterwards.
I remember reading an essay on an atheist site years ago that pretty much expanded that to an essay showing that Pascal's wager, that classic argument, shows that, if anything, it's more moral to not believe in, the afterlife for that reason.
Yeah, and there's that idea of, you can go down to like a more deep philosophical or maybe psychological idea of, then you can argue, is anything anyone ever does nice? Because when you do something nice, you get that nice feeling, and then one can argue, well, you're actually only being nice for that nice feeling, and it's very interesting you're doing that pathway of, I think, is it moral relativism, that sort of...
Well, you could add, does altruism truly exist then in that case? I'm of the camp that says no. Ultimately, everything is done for self-benefit, for selfish reasons, really. Even if you're helping somebody, you're doing that because you get some kind of gratification from it, or you feel that your world would be a worse place if you didn't enact on it. So,
yeah, that's kind of how I sort of feel about it. And one of the reasons I brought up this sort of life after death thing was because my own religious and spiritual ideologies have kind of been changing a bit recently. I'm not going to suddenly come out on this show and say I'm a born-again Christian. But, my sort of... One of the reasons I don't believe in deities, for example, is because everything I see in nature and everything what seems to be our understanding of the universe, there doesn't seem to be... There are hierarchical systems in general of more of each hierarchical system which kind of allows the life cycle to become more complex and work better. Ants and humans, for example, we can kill ants. I am more powerful than one ant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm necessarily more important than an ant, even though I'm a human, so I would rather, kill an ant than a human. But a god doesn't fit in my mind, to anything else with the universe. All of the universe all seems to balance itself out. You can't build a mountain without digging a hole. Nothing, there's no life without death, all these sorts of other things. And it all balances out. And then, because we didn't understand things X amount of years ago, and obviously there's still a lot we don't understand today, people just kind of decide, oh, well, the thing is, the answer to that is just pop a man at the top who just does it all. And it's like, what? That doesn't fit with anything.
No, I guess it sounds easier, and then you don't have to think about it.
Well, that's what I was told, but I just always think it just always asks me more questions. I was just like, well, where did God come from? Oh, he's always been. So,
well, there are. We kind of know now from neurobiology and cognitive sciences that there are reasons why humans kind of come up to these beliefs in the first place. It's been said we evolved with a good knack for pattern detection, and we want to kind of project patterns onto things we see, and sometimes that leads to seeing patterns where things shouldn't be. Instinctively, since we're social primates, we look at all these things that happen and say, okay, that was the result of a human enacting on it. So when we come to something we don't really understand, I can see why some people would have that impulse of thinking, okay, there must be some kind of being that consciously and manually made it that way. But of course, there are inherent fallacies like within that and things that still doesn't understand. But we kind of, again, we're learning more about like the science of what causes religious beliefs in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there was even, I remember watching a Stephen Hawking documentary, and he believed, the documentary was kind of trying to explain how life could have started without a god to begin with. And I watched an hour of it, and I can tell you something subatomic particles, I think. That's about all I can remember, except one other bit in that whole documentary I remember, which I think it works quite well to mock a lot of modern day religions. I don't think that was Stephen Hawking's intention, but I can say that I have used it a few times. It's the eclipse. The Vikings used to believe, or some Vikings used to believe, that an eclipse was caused by the wolf god eating the moon. So they'd all yell at the moon when it happened, and then obviously the eclipse would pass, but they would assume that because they were yelling at it, that was the thing that stopped the eclipse. Yeah. And that sounds preposterous nowadays. You know, you say it to someone, and someone goes, God, those Vikings are idiots. But it's like, yeah, but you got to think, like, there's the amount of people on this planet who think of something, in my mind, almost as crazy. You know, sure. God created the universe or the earth or the sun in however many days, but you couldn't have had a day until you actually create the sun. So,
or even on a lower level, things like when I was in college, for example, I worked in a convenience store, and I sold this one guy like a winning scratch ticket. And so he kept coming back to me, even if there were other like cashiers available, me as being his lucky seller, you know, things. So it's that example again of thinking that you see some kind of pattern and then, you know, acting on it, thinking there's a correlation where there really wasn't one.
Yeah, exactly. And with the life after death thing as well, with what my kind of thing's been morphing to is, yeah, I don't believe the hierarchical structures because the gods and all that sort of jazz, and the idea of heaven and hell doesn't really make any sense because, first of all, where are they? And second of all, you know, eternity in heaven where you can't do anything that's classed as sin sounds literally like my hell. Like, would then my version of hell be, you know, fire and brimstone, all that stuff? That would, yeah, no doubtly undoubtedly suck. But if you subjected me to, you know, 25 hours of Nicki Minaj while having other people read Bible verses to me while feeding me cauliflower, that would be worse. Yeah. So where does that fit in? You know, do you have different hells for different people who dislike and don't like other things? But I understand that, you know, in a historical significance, I believe that Christianity, even though I don't agree with all its ethos and its morals, I believe that a lot of it was arguably a necessary moral compass back when we were sort of adolescents in morality, in that sense. I mean, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are, if you think that the heaven and hell for me kind of is like when you have an infant who is not old enough to understand empathy. And so when they don't understand empathy, you have to basically do like a reward punishment sort of system until they start to understand things more. And that's kind of how I view heaven and hell back when it was invented, the concepts of it. I wondered if, and I think that maybe that's positive at that time, but I don't agree with it now. I wonder what your perception of that is.
Well, you certainly don't need a supernatural threat to, you know, raise good morals.
Definitely not now. Yeah. No, of course.
But I mean, you can look at Jewish communities, for example, who have very, you know, some very upright citizens who have been raised really well, and they were raised without the threat of eternal punishment if they did wrong things, or maybe there was other forms of supernatural threats. Jehovah will get mad if you do this or that. I don't know. But you can certainly, I don't know. I'm not going to claim to know all that much about parenting since I'm not a parent. Though, for people who are interested, I'll give a plug to another podcast. There's a Raising Hell podcast, which was done by Satanists talking about satanic parenting. And, you know, a Satanist approach to that topic might be worth checking out.
Yeah, I'll make sure I put a link to that. I'll probably check that out as well. I mean, I don't have any plans to be a parent.
I think the host has since discontinued it, but there's still like a ton of archived episodes. So.
Yeah, I definitely will check that out. If I was going to say, I keep basically bringing up to a point and then stopping, then reverting back. So I do apologise for you and any listeners if I keep repeating myself. With life after death, I mean, one thing that is, at this moment in time, because we're still fairly adolescent in our understanding of the universe and everything. I mean, I think modern science and things have only been like doing quite well for probably, say, 100 years. I mean, I think electricity's only really been about since the late 1800s. But with consciousness, that's one of the things that intrigues me the most.
Yeah.
And the reason I said at this towards the start, I'm like becoming slightly more agnostic than atheist. I am still atheist, and I do not believe there is anything. So
atheist and agnostic, just to clarify, are not mutually exclusive terms, because atheism is just whether theism and atheism describe whether you believe or not. Gnosticism, agnosticism is how much claim to know about what you're believing. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very glad that you have clarified that, because some of my terminology is just way off. So it's with that, I always want to say a little side tangent is someone I had on a podcast the other day. They said they saw like a bumper sticker that said they're a militant agnostic, which is that they don't know and you don't either. And I think that's brilliant. And
yeah, I think it's a misuse of the term, but anyway, go on.
With my views on it and things, I think with consciousness, one thing that's opening me up more to the idea of potentially life after death is only on the basis of our lack of understanding of consciousness right now, where I maybe haven't looked into it enough, but when we die, if our consciousness just kind of dissipates and that's the end of it, or if consciousness is a form of energy and maybe because energy can't be destroyed, it can only be transferred, potentially our consciousness could maybe live on in some sort of other way or facet. I don't know what your thoughts on that. I assume you generally disagree, but I'm just interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I certainly don't believe in the idea about consciousness that transcends. From what we know about consciousness, it always seems to be consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity. And we know that when you damage, for example, certain parts of the brain, that certain parts of consciousness, go haywire. For example, there have been people who've been blinded when their lobes in the back of their head, the ones that control vision, get messed up. There are some others who operate just fine, but when the lobe is damaged where they can't, that affects speech, then they can't speak. And other parts of the brain that, affect memory. So they can speak and they can see and everything, but they don't remember anything that happened 15 minutes before or whatever. So I don't really buy this idea that when the entire brain dies, everything is suddenly back. It just seems illogical to me. So I see, the death of full brain activity as death being the end of consciousness.
Yeah, I do agree. This is more, I'm kind of flirting almost with the idea. It's more of a nice thing to think, when someone passes away. It's nice to think they go to heaven. I would like to think some family members are in heaven. That doesn't mean I necessarily do believe it. But linking on with that consciousness thing, this is completely off topic, but let's go for it. Opinions on artificial intelligence. Going from that, so would you think that I don't know if you've ever looked into this sort of thing, but if artificial intelligence could ever be conscious and what consciousness truly is?
Well, yeah, this is where it gets into the difficulty of being able to define consciousness in the first place. And speaking not only as a Satanist, but somebody, I've actually worked in the AI fields professionally as an engineer as well. And there are certain degrees of artificial intelligence, really. And so where you draw the line between that and what we would consider, quote unquote, normal intelligence of a person, something I guess you could say is being indistinguishable from that of a human. It's interesting where you would want to draw the line, because we have developed artificial intelligence chat rooms, for example, robots that reply back. And some people would talk and honestly not be able to tell that this was, whether this was a real person or not.
The Turing test.
Yeah, there we go. With the Turing test. And we get closer and closer with finding out some of the flaws and then correcting some of that of, some of those imperfections that we find. Some of the questions that kind of trip up, may trip up an AI, chat room thing might be corrected against. So I don't fear AI, as much as some people do, and I told people, like, some of my work, some people are afraid, like, oh, aren't you afraid of, like, something like the Terminator, happening where robots are controlling everything? And it's like, no.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people don't know. There's I may get these terms wrong, so apologies, but I think it's general AI and another type of AI, like Siri on one's iPhone. That's a degree of artificial intelligence because it can learn some of your sort of the way you speak, little sort of slang words you use and things like that. It picks up on that and eventually it adapts itself, and that is technically AI. Whereas people, they think of this Skynet, this sort of being that comes to life suddenly decides to kill all humans and then take over the internet and all this sort of other stuff. Where linking on with that, with the sort of AI and the types of intelligence, then if we went the other way with animals, for example, I believe, say, dogs, they seem fairly conscious. I don't know if you would agree, but then if you do, where does it go down for the line? I know it's quite squirrely. I'm not expecting you to say, I've got all this worked out, but like, you know what I mean?
Well, I think, dogs and other mammals certainly are capable of experiencing different degrees of emotions, and it shows. I think anybody who's, been a dog owner, for example, certainly knows. A little harder to detect in cats and in birds, but, their owners will say that they can tell there's certain signs that express emotions and all that. A lot of people think, well, that's, the emotion is like a defining thing that is making human versus the non-human. But, again, there's a lot of degrees within that. It's kind of a continuum. It's not really a simple binary thing of, being Data or being, from Star Trek, or being, somebody who has emotion. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, I asked the world's most vague question, so it's I wasn't expecting a ridiculously concise answer. It's more intrigued. It's more you have a lot of philosophies and perception on life which I either align with or respect, but also you're clearly very intelligent, especially because of, out of most people my age, I know quite a lot about religion comparatively, but in reality, I actually don't know that much about religion almost at all. I know bits and pieces about a little bit here and there. I can kind of, if you listened into a conversation with me with someone of any religion for maybe 5 minutes, you'd think, oh, he probably knows what he's talking about. But after that, it just kind of descends into drivel.
Well, I think the more you delve into almost learning any topic, the more you kind of realize, like, wow, I really only know a fraction of this.
100%. Yeah, there's an analogy which I've used a couple of times on the podcast, which is, you can use it for almost anything. I use it a lot of the time for my own self. When I was a teenager, I used to think I knew everything. So you can use it for knowledge, and it's also good to be used for teenagers, which explains why a lot of teenagers can be quite arrogant and things, which is, imagine like a door, and you can see there's basically a keyhole. And when you're when you're really young, you can jump and maybe glance through it for a split second. But then once you get to a certain height and you can actually look through that keyhole, I'd say when you become sort of a preteen, when you start going through adolescence, that's when you're looking through that keyhole, and so you can see one perspective of the room. And then what one does, and I know what I did, especially as a teenager, was I was thinking, okay, I know everything that's in that room now. I've looked through that one keyhole so much, I just know everything. And then you become an adult, and you get the key and you unlock the door and you open the door, and then you're just stood in the doorway of this absolutely colossal atrium full, that's like 1 million stories high, full of everything you could ever imagine. And you're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
And I think of that with, but not about being a teenager, but knowledge. I used to think I was so smart, and then you meet someone who's actually intelligent or is more of an expert in their field, and it's just like, no. So did you said when you were a teenager you got into religion and things, did that sort of, did your development of religion go because you were thinking your life was maybe missing something, or you just more sort of curious?
It was a mix of both. I think it was throughout childhood being forced to go to Catholic Mass every week. And knowing that there were other options out there, and knowing that, okay, this thing I'm doing just doesn't really feel like a fit for me. also doesn't make sense for these other, for this reason and this reason and this.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a lot of young teens, I started exploring other things that were out there. Got into some New Age dabbling, and also some like occult dabbling at the time. I was devout Wiccan in high school, if you can believe it.
Oh wow!
And Wiccans on the whole tend to be almost as actively anti-Satanism as like Christians can be.
Really.
I don't think I know anything about Wiccan. Would you mind divulging a little bit?
So, Wicca was a religion founded by Gerald Gardner in the 1950s, and its adherents call themselves witches. And there are other different splits of Wicca that derive from the same thing and kind of change from author to author. So getting Wiccans to agree on something can be a little difficult at times. But especially throughout the 1980s, through the Satanic Panic, Wiccans use the pentagram. They use it in the one point up fashion to represent the ideas that they've adopted from neo-paganism and the older Earth religions and stuff. And they really, really hate being mistaken for Satanists, because people will see their black clothing and their pentagram and be like, oh, we're not Satanists. We don't do all this stuff. But then to defend themselves, they'll sometimes spread the same lies about us that, no, we witches don't sacrifice babies and, drink goat's blood and stuff. Those are Satanists who do that. And it's like, no, we don't actually do those things either. Oddly enough, I mean, I've had people ask me if I was a Wiccan when they see pentagram jewelry or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting confusion.
Oh, yeah, that is. I mean, I didn't know really much about Wiccans at all. And
I grew up outside of Salem, Massachusetts, where there is coincidentally a pretty significant Wiccan population, other neo-pagans as well. I think I think what appealed to me at the time was that, hey, this is something that's kind of esoteric, but it's also kind of self-righteous because I can call myself a white witch and all this stuff at the same time. But to get back to your question, just to finish this up, after Wicca, I stumbled around to like Far Eastern religions too. So I was going back and forth to different things until I had finally found Satanism, which was sometime in my early 20s. And this was after I had already moved out of my parents' house. So I know some people say, oh, you're a Satanist just because you're rebelling against your parents' Christianity. It's like, no, I get along great with my parents. And I didn't discover it till after I had already moved out, and already about a good 10 years after I decided I wasn't a Christian anyway. So
I bet you get a lot of people doing that thing, which is to link it back to what I said previously about sort of my metal music. There's a lot of people, they like to tell you what your interpretation of your choices are.
Oh, yeah,
You get that a lot.
Yeah, a lot of people think there's some kind of like gotcha, oh, you're a Satanist. Well, then obviously it's because of this and like, that. And most people who haven't even done, research like the basic things so why would you be a Satanist? Because obviously, like, this thing is wrong. And it's like, no, well, we don't actually believe that thing at all if you actually took the time to read up.
Yeah, it must be so frustrating.
That's why I appreciate you, for example, that you've actually did a bit of research, because I've, myself and other COS people have been interviewed by some people who did, like, absolutely no research, and they just see the name, and so they're starting in with questions like so is it true that Aleister Crowley tells you to go eat sell your soul for blah blah blah? It's like,
Crowley was about before, even the Satanic Bible was written, wasn't he? Like Crowley died like several years, like decades before.
He died in the 50s. COS was founded in the 60s. So
yeah, I find that very not only rude but also very disrespectful.
Well, he wasn't a Satanist, and it's strange that people keep calling him Satanist. He didn't call himself a Satanist. His followers, like the Thelemites and the religion of Thelema and Golden Dawn and all that, they don't consider him a Satanist, and Satanists don't consider him a Satanist. So Why people keep calling him a Satanist, I don't know. It's only Christians who think Aleister Crowley was a Satanist.
Well, it's probably they think, Ozzy Osbourne had one song about him, and then Ozzy Osbourne's metal, so he is clearly a Satan worshipper, and then that means that because he's a Satan worshipper, then Satanists are all the same, and therefore you're all in this big pot. Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of. But
if he was a scary occultist who used like spooky symbols, then he's a Satanist. That must be it, right?
Yeah, well, he's kind of scary, and I don't understand them, and the devil is scary, so I know. I figured it out.
Well, throughout the 80s, we had to hear accusations that Ozzy Osbourne was a Satanist as well. And almost anybody in heavy metal. It's like, no, Ozzy is this guy from the blue-collar streets of Birmingham.
Yeah. Oh, man, and he's so many things. Yeah, with your religion as well, I mean, a lot of people, the amount of misconceptions with it, and it does just baffle me that people would actually even not look up the religion. Like, when I emailed yourselves and you came back and said, yeah, I'd be interested, just, I'd prefer it if you just looked up the religion a little bit, just so you have a vague idea. And I had a very vague idea. I knew that there wasn't the misconceptions that were had already. But like, I implore anyone who's listening to this podcast, especially if they're this far through, I'd imagine they're quite interested by this always, go on the Church of Satan website and look at it, because it's just, I'm not going to say like, oh, I'm going to join the Church of Satan or anything, but I can't really see almost anything with yourselves that I disagree with, which was the most surprising thing. I mean, but arguably my own idea of kind of maybe on the line of like spirituality and life after death, that sort of thing, even though obviously, as we've established, that's not exclusive. It just makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I've always said is in life is basically just, you should always look out for number one. You have to be the top priority over everyone, excluding the outlier of having a child for a certain period of time. You obviously have to put the child first. But generally speaking, like I live my life, I do what I want and do things to benefit me. And what comes second is, do everything you want to do, but try and hurt or try and piss off as least amount of people as possible while doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like that is like a really basic, almost layman terms of sort of yourselves ideology is just, and that's how I feel like people should live.
Yeah, and that is pretty blasphemous to say that, because it goes against the core of what all the spiritual religions are saying, that no, you have to put God first, or you can't think for yourself, or you shouldn't research things.
And that's the whole sort of, as we mentioned previously, the whole religion for many, many years has been suppressing and doing even worse to a lot of people who are free thinkers and things. And it's sitting down and discussing these ideas of people and discussing alternative thinking is the best way to, if you are so right about everything, that if you talk to someone who you consider to be wrong, if you're so smart and right, the one conversation that people view, you'll be clearly the one who's right. But a lot of people don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's so much easier to just, cling to reinforce your own misconceptions and all that, because people just hate being proven wrong in general. We've seen that with, I don't know if you're familiar with the Monty Hall game, the Monty Hall problem for mathematics, but essentially it is a good example of how people will, don't like to be wrong and will try to rationalize why they were, correct and stuff.
I haven't heard this, no.
I don't know if I want to get completely into it, but it's
that's fine.
We certainly see that all the time with Christians and Bible interpretations. And they'll try to say, well, my position is faith-based, isn't your, since you don't know everything completely, aren't you saying you're faith-based too? And therefore we're on equal terms or equally probable. No, it's a bogus argument, because, yes, I have faith. You could say I have faith that the sun will rise tomorrow, but the thing is, if that doesn't happen, I'm not going to try to rationalize. I'm going to admit that, wow, I was wrong, and try to figure out what's going on, not try to rationalize, well, when I said that, what I really meant was this instead. So you see, I'm not wrong.
People do have that. And I mean, I had it a lot, especially when I was growing up. It was, especially when I was a teenager, because people feel like, it's almost like this weird, it's like intellectual vulnerability. If you say to someone, I'm open to being wrong, I may be wrong, then that's basically, you're being vulnerable intellectually. You're saying, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And as you say, some people just cling to their ideas of thinking they're so right and thinking they know everything. And it's like, you can't learn anything if you think you know everything.
Well, the thing is, a lot of atheists are under the perception that there's a strong correlation between superstitious belief and IQ, that like the lower, the stupider you are, the more prone you are to believe in like weird things. But what actually happens is the reverse is true once you get into the upper, like higher IQs, because people who have like a really high like intellect are also sometimes really good at rationalizing away evidence to the contrary to their own mind. And so you do find some people who are, have like some superstitious beliefs that are in that top level. I'm a member of Mensa, for the record, the High IQ Society. And Mensa actually has, for example, a Bible study group, like in Mensa. Mm. So, yeah, there are like some people who maybe, geniuses in IQ sense, but still believe in some stupid things.
Yeah, it's people. They do make I mean, certain people are just like, oh, I believe this. There's not really any reason for it, but it's my own little thing, and I'm quiet about it. And it's like fair dues. But then there are the people who are vocal about it, shall we say? I'm interested. Some of the things, obviously, on your podcast, you had a lot of the clips from Bill Hicks. Are you interested in individuals? Have you heard the term the intellectual dark web?
I've heard the term. I'm not sure, honestly, what it is.
Well, the dark web is obviously, for anyone listening who doesn't know, it's I think you can basically get a way to get a browser that can search without any restrictions. And people buy guns on there, child porn, all that sort of horrendousness. And I want to clear up there's nothing to do with that. It's a kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. It's Christopher Hitchens. Obviously, he passed away.
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, me too. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Joe Rogan being one of the big ones. Those ones are... There's a gentleman called, I think it's Brett Weinstein, and he kind of coined the term, and it's essentially individuals in the new media movement, essentially. Jordan Peterson, he's a part of it as well, kind of.
So it sounds like a lot of my YouTube subscription list.
I was going to say, yeah.
Because it sounds, from what I gather from talking with you, and a lot of your pursuits, you're interested in religion, but that doesn't, you are in a secular religion, but you're interested in just knowing things about some of the other religions, and it's just... Knowledge is such a great resource we have we have the resources like the internet and things now, and they can really help foster love and intrigue. And so many people just waste their time going on Instagram for fucking 5 hours a day and watching the Kardashians, and it's like they're fine to do that. And then you mentioned that you've, like I've said to some people at work, I was going to speak to someone at the Church of Satan, and the other people were like, what? Why do you want to do that? It's like, because it's someone who has a different religion. I'm interested by it. And the people just don't get that. I mean, do you find that frustrating that some people are quite closed-minded in their own intellectual pursuits?
Yeah, that happens. It does seem a little strange to me. And sometimes that can happen among people new to Satanism as well. Because some people, when they first get into it, may be a little gung-ho on the blasphemy part, probably because they're trying to escape some of the, reprogram themselves from some of the religious indoctrination that they've gotten, and they find Satanism pretty liberating for that, and being able to kind of get all that stuff off their chest, which is fine initially, but then you kind of want to move on and apply the philosophy in life and actually do things. We kind of call that phenomenon first phasers, or phase one people, who get into Satanism, want to shout it from the rooftops, and we kind of say, all right, that's good, but, calm down there for a second.
It sounds like when young adults first allowed to drink. It's like, I can drink now. I got to drink it all the time. Yeah, this is what it's all about. It's like, no, you can quietly sit down and have a glass of wine with a steak. Yeah. You don't have to yell it from the rooftops. So... It frustrates me, I will say, sometimes.
There's no shame. But Satanism, we say Satanism demands study, not worship. And by that we mean you should be going out and, learning about the things that interest you and questioning things and finding things out. You don't become a better Satanist by saying, I want to be really devout to the idea of Satanism itself and, wear more pentagrams than the next person or something like that. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I wonder have you, from your experience, had any people who kind of enter the church and then kind of try to one up other people's almost devotion, religiosity? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean that's a social phenomenon that I swear happens like in every circle. In our case, I would call it unholier than thou.
Nice.
You do run across some of these people. It doesn't happen all that often, but some people might be kind of pretentious with that. And then we can point to say, well, if you look at the 9 satanic sins, pretentiousness is one of the sins. So maybe you should rethink this thing.
I'm interested. I don't think I've even asked you with what you've just said, and I clearly didn't research enough. So are there yourselves have commandments in a sense, or in the same way?
Well, we don't have commandments. We have the 9 satanic statements, because commandments kind of implies that, they're decreed from some kind of higher power. And we have the 9 satanic statements, which are in the Satanic Bible, that kind of summarize what Satanism is about. We also have another list called the 9 satanic sins, and these aren't things that, we believe people will be punished if they follow, or or if we kick people out of the Church of Satan for finding it. They're just sort of pitfalls in human behavior that usually when we find things go wrong, it usually comes down to to one of those things. And there's similarly the 11 rules of the earth. So it's good. I mean, since we are a religion, it's good to have some things like quantifiable and relatable that way.
Definitely. And with 9 as well, I know yourselves have, is it the Council of 9 at the top of the reigns?
Yep, Council of 9. We use the number 9 a lot, and that's not a coincidence. We do kind of view philosophically 9 as the satanic number, because it's viewed as the carnal number because of some of the many mathematical properties that when you do things to multiples of 9, things reduce back down to 9 and so on.
Yeah, numerology is an interesting one. I've got a friend of mine who's herself, she's secular and things like that, but she's got this thing about the number 23. I mean, obviously there's that argument. I know there's a film about it as well. She was into it before the film, but obviously there's that argument of once one. It's that whole, a good example is the thing, your mate gets like a fancy car, and then as soon as he gets it, you see it everywhere.
Yeah. There's a confirmation bias going on. I kind of like numerology just as a artistic thing, even if I think scientifically it's just a bunch of bunk and, psychological confirmation bias. I got my degrees in mathematics, so I love math, and I love numbers in general, and I did actually have sometimes working professionally in Salem, Massachusetts. There's a big tourist attraction because of the witch trials, and I worked the psychic fair there for a couple of years, doing tarot readings and stuff for tourists, and I would do numerology on occasion too. And I saw it as an atheist. I see it as a novelty and an art, and most of the people who were coming there were just tourists who, I want to have my tarot cards read, or I want my palm read or something. And, I'd be careful not to give people, decisions that would probably be harmful for them, or,
Individuals who are kind of searching for an answer, and then if you do slightly too much of an inflection in one way or another, then they can see this as some sort of huge sign from the universe and rapidly make a big decision, not based on reasoning or logic, but kind of this. Yeah,
I put in a lot of disclaimers when I ran into people like that. I know a lot of people think that and even though I was the exception, not the rule in that environment, because there are a lot of people, the far majority of tarot readers and really do believe in the power of the cards or whatever it is that they have. They're not charlatans. They're they really are believers in this. I saw this as a novelty thing that I was doing for tourists.
Yeah. I've had my tarot cards read a couple of times. I think it's quite an interesting exercise, and it's as you say, it's almost, there's quite a few things that myself and my friends like to do just thought experiments of just, it's nice to think of things like this. The whole heaven and hell thing is something I quite like to think about on occasion. Not that I honestly, I doubt I'll ever believe in a true heaven or hell, but it's nice to just kind of ponder, if there was one, what would go in here? What would do this? What if you were, some of the questions I had when I was younger in Catholic school, I used to say to, what if you're, the nicest person ever, but every day you wake up and you say, I hate you, God. What happens then? Because blaspheming is apparently this huge sin, and you never ask for forgiveness. And I used to ask these sort of difficult questions and things, and now it's more just, I don't necessarily even need an answer for a lot of these things, and it's quite a nice thought experiment. And same with seeing numbers. It's kind of, I see it in that way of, I guess I do see the number 23 quite a lot with the example of my friend Carla. My birth year is 1994. You add those numbers together, 23. The house I was born in, and not born in, the house I lived in for 16 years of my life, and my father eventually died in. That was 113. So 2, 3. You can kind of. It's quite easy to kind of add things up and put things together, and it's kind of fun to do that. I don't.
I mean, and that's as somebody who's an atheist and hardcore materialist. I don't see what's wrong with treating numerology as a novelty thing, just like I have a coffee mug with my astrology sign on it, my horoscope sign. That doesn't mean I believe in astrology. I just thought it was a nice, it was an interesting novelty thing, just like, you might have a keychain saying, oh, here's what your name is in Hawaiian. Oh, that's interesting, Doesn't really mean anything beyond trivia to me, but, it's a nice novelty. Whereas I have run into some, people like, oh my God, how can you have a coffee mug with a Pisces sign on it? Don't you know that astrology is all bunk and blah, blah, blah? It's like, it's just a coffee mug.
It's funny you say it, because I'm a Pisces, and I've got this little seashell thing that my parents got me ages ago, which obviously has got Pisces on it. I just thought that's kind of nifty and that's cool, and I kept that. And I've never read a horoscope and gone, oh my God, it's going to change my life. But I've on the odd occasion gone, I just kind of fancy seeing what they say. Just, it's kind of a bit of fun. I'm never going to, it's impossible for essentially 1/12 of the population to, I think there are 12 horoscopes, if for 1/12 of the population of the entire world of 7 or 8 billion people to all have the same experience in a day, and some bloke writing in a newspaper could figure this out. It seems a bit off to me. Not even to mention if you read different horoscopes, say different things. But I will say with the numerology thing as well, it makes me think of like the. It's almost like when a song follows you, in a sense. I've had it before. You just hear a song, and then you make a point of that, and then everywhere you go for weeks, it's just everywhere. It's kind of fun. It's kind of, oh, cool, that song's there. Haha, it's fun to point out.
And I think that's something we recognize in Satanism. Again, even though we're hardcore, we're atheist materialists, we don't see the shame in seeing, poetic things and the aesthetics of of that, or just having, in the coffee mug example. I think many people still read horoscopes, and I think it's not because they believe in astrology so much as they just have an underlying self-interest. They want to read things about themselves. And
and that links in a lot with a lot of people with their religion and the whole holier than thou sort of ideology. They like to think, I'm going to be a good person. How can I show I'm a good person? I'm going to be a Christian, and then being as Christian as possible to kind of almost virtue signal to other people. Look how good I am.
Yeah.
Not everyone.
I know, but I still think even that people have some interest in it, as much as they try to deny being like an individual. Still comes down to that.
Yeah, I just want to get your opinion on one other thing. This is to do with your you being a member of the Church of Satan. I'm just interested. Okay. Do you have any tattoos? I mean, if you do, you don't have to just go into detail to what they are. I was just interested if you do.
I have absolutely no tattoos. I have no tattoos or piercings, which in 2019 kind of makes me a freak.
Yeah, a lot of people say like the new almost rebellion is not getting a tattoo. Is there any reason for that out of interest?
I've just never really decided on anything. I kind of realize, there's a permanent marking. I do know other Satanists as well as non-Satanists who are completely covered in tattoos, or are professional tattoo artists themselves. I was just down in Florida at a Howl gallery where every year the Church of Satan puts on an art gallery showing and performances and stuff. That's in a tattoo tattoo artist shop, and it's a combination of that and gallery. It's interesting. But I've just never had any personal interest in getting a tattoo. I've had some ideas. I thought of, like, maybe if I got one, and this goes back to the fun kind of blasphemy stuff, I've thought of getting the words like Leviticus 19:28.
Oh, the one that says you can't have tattoos.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Bible verse saying no tattoos.
That's pretty brilliant. I've thought about just randomly getting, because I've got one tattoo. I've got a Star Wars tattoo on my arm. It's I love Star Wars, first of all, and it's a homage to my dad who got me into Star Wars. So just, that's really as deep as it goes. But I thought about once just getting a tattoo that just says tattoo, just get the words tattoo tattooed on my wrist. I just thought about doing that once. I haven't done it. I'm really tempted to, but I haven't quite done it yet. But okay, I've got one last question. Then I'll free you for my presence.
I'm happy to keep going.
Oh, wonderful! I was going to say, in the church, do you find that the alternative lifestyle, shall I say? So, piercings, tattoos, obviously heavy metal we've touched upon, that sort of thing. In the Church of Satan, do you find that is slightly more commonplace than an average, or is it just, from your eyes, equally proportionate to what it is in general population?
I think we do get a disproportionate amount of people who may be in that circle, and I think it's because a lot of people who may be kind of loners and fierce individuals and nonconformists kind of find their way into that sort of circle just as well as they may find themselves into Satanism circle. So both of those circles kind of attract, to a certain extent, some of that same type. And again, there are lots of exceptions, as I just explained. I don't have any tattoos or piercings, but...
Yeah, I wondered if it was with that, because a lot of the alternative lifestyle. I mean, I've metal gigs, tattoo. I haven't got any piercings, but a lot of my friends have and that sort of jazz. It is a lot of what people carry around with themselves and what they show to other people is, when one gets a tattoo. I mean, my tattoo is for me, but to be fair, other people obviously see it, and that's not. When I got it, obviously that was in my mind that other people are going to see it, so I want it to look good for when other people see it in things. But the alternative lifestyle is often linked with, as you say, individuals. Not everyone, obviously, neither of us are saying that, but there are a lot of individuals who feel who are outliers, outcasts. They don't feel like they fit in anywhere, and they find a sense of community and purpose in alternative music and certain religions and things like that. And yeah, I was just interested if you did find that in your religion.
Yeah, there are, but then the flip side to that is you do find some people who get so far into one of these, I guess, alternative subculture, for lack of a better term, that they almost take the ironic conformist kind of action to it, where you run across some people that are not really being all that rebellious and individual, but seem to be more conforming to an existing stereotype, or they suddenly find themselves making rules like, I listen to metal and my friend listens to metal. We're metalheads, but, I have to laugh at my friend if my friend also owns, a CD from Frank Sinatra or something. So you start imposing these rules which are not really all that free in the first place. And it happens with, all sorts of subcultures.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that is something funny that I found that, especially when I was in the midst of being much more involved in the alternative sort of subculture, it was always wearing black, baggy jeans and black trousers and loads of necklaces and jewelry, and a lot of people would wear makeup and things like that. And then the irony is that you want to look as different from the normal as possible, so you all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
So instead of it being like, the mainstream and all these individuals, you've got these mainstream people, and then you've got the alternative people, and all the alternative people dressed in one way and all the mainstream dressed in the other way, and it's quite funny with that.
I was interviewed by the BBC back in 2006 when we were doing the 6606 High Mass, and that day I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a pretty loud one, and I'm thinking, like, BBC is probably not going to like this or be, maybe be surprised by this, like the last kind of attire they were expecting. And sure enough, when they talked to me for a long time, but the only time they interviewed me, they filmed like a couple of 20-second like sound bites and only like pointed the camera at me from like the neck up.
Doesn't fit in the narrative. You can't have a Hawaiian shirt wearing Satanist. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Can't be a fun-loving party animal and also worship Satan, even though that's not what you do. But
yeah.
With podcasting, obviously there's the Radio Free Satan and things. Have you been at the forefront of sort of Radio Free Satan, or was that already an existing thing when you joined?
Well, I remember when it launched in 2000, so I was a listener at first. And had ideas for shows, but didn't end up putting one into action until spring, like 2003. One of the reasons for the delays is that we had some different policies and we had different owners. And one of the old policies we had was nothing from the RIAA, the Recording Industry Artists of America, which basically meant no material that showed up on a major label. And I knew George Carlin was on Atlantic Records, and I thought, like, well, if I'm going to do a satanic podcast and I can't do George Carlin, then what the hell's the point? So then we had some change in owners, and we had some change in rules and stuff, and that was lifted, and so that's when I went ahead with my comedy and novelty podcast.
And with podcasting in general, do you listen to many sort of podcasts that aren't involved with Radio Free Satan? I know I mentioned Joe Rogan slightly earlier, but I don't know if you listen to him, Sam Harris, or any of these other sort of individuals. I
do listen to some of them. Peter Schiff's, which is more of a economics one. I'm subscribed and I listen to some. Mostly what I'm listening to, though, is just some of the other fellow podcasts on Radio Free Satan. It's different music things.
Yeah, I was going to say, and with in your free time as well, this is I'll start to wrap up now, but out of just interest, what are your hobbies sort of outside of having a podcast, your job, and Church of Satan?
Well, I'm a musician. I host an open mic at a coffee house once or twice a week. We do acoustic music. I also play in a band. So music has always been a big thing for me. I've been playing bass guitar for over 30 years. But these days play a lot of mandolin and ukulele and stuff like that. And I like digging up music especially from the early 20th century, some of the stuff that I had mentioned. And so I've taken some of that, rendered it, put things on YouTube.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, is music quite a big thing in the Church of Satan as well? Because obviously you mentioned about LaVey being... was it a musicologist? And then also, is Peter, am I right in thinking Peter Gilmore? He's quite, he's got a qualification in music. He's quite...
Yeah, he does. He got his degree in music at NYU. So yeah, he's a musician. He has some of his own albums of things he's released as well, as did LaVey.
So is it quite, I assume because obviously Church of Satan is a lot about sort of individuality and expression and things like that. Well, music is quite... synergistic in that, I'd say. So is it quite rife in the Church of Satan? A lot of musicians and things, or quite a interest in music?
Yeah, there is quite a lot of musicians in there. There are certainly some people who can't play, can't hold a tune or hum a tune as well. But yeah, there's I'd say a disproportionate number of people really passionate about music and musicians.
I do get a little bit... I shouldn't get annoyed about these things. I get annoyed about a lot of little things. I don't ever get really hugely angry at many things, but a lot of things do just annoy me a bit. And one of the things is with people who... it shouldn't bother me, but people who aren't that into music, and if they say it out loud, they're like, oh, I'm just not that into music, and I can't... That's like saying, I just don't like the taste of any food. It's like, how can you say that?
I've never understood it myself. I know those people exist, but I've never understood it.
Yeah, it's like some people say, I'm not really into podcasts. It's like, okay, if you're not... I can understand that to a degree. I still don't fully agree, because I think there's so many genres of podcasting, but you don't like music. It's like, well, that's almost like saying, okay, well, Willie Nelson sounds the exact same as Slipknot, who sounds the same as Frank Sinatra, who sounds the same as Lady Gaga. It's like, what? What's happening here?
I've never understood people who don't even have like a personal music collection. Like, never even owned more than a dozen albums of something. Come on.
Yeah, I know. Or you ask what their favourite band is, and they're like, I don't really know. I just kind of listen to what's on the radio. It's like, you poor soul. No wonder you don't think you don't like music. If you only listen to the top 40 all the time, that's probably why. If I was subjected to only listen to music that's on the radio all the time, I probably wouldn't like music much either. Oh, man. Well, it's getting kind of late over here in the UK, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this talk with you, Bill.
Yes, I enjoyed it. Was
wonderful. And not only learning about the Church of Satan, but you as an individual sound like an incredibly intelligent and enlightened individual.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so it's been an absolute pleasure. I just think if you want to plug just your show again, Radio Free Satan, and anything else you'd like to say about the Church of Satan, and I can sort of wrap it up.
All right. So radiofreesatan.com is where you can find my podcast and lots of others. My podcast is The Devil's Mischief. It's comedy and novelty podcast because comedy is very satanic in that it's the antithesis of piety and sanctimonious. And my website that has that link and everything else is imjustabill.com.
Brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. Well, as I said, Bill, it's been absolutely stellar having you on. And maybe later down the line I can have you on again and we can just purely talk about something else. Yeah,
that would be good. In fact, that would be a great bait and switch for people if you say we're going to talk to a Magister of the Church of Satan and we just talk about movies the whole time or something.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man.
Well, perfect. Well, thanks for coming on.
All right. Well, thank you.
And that's the end of the podcast, guys. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you liked hearing Bill M talk as much as I did, be sure to go check out his podcast, The Devil's Mischief. I've included a link to that below, as well as a link to Radio Free Satan, which is essentially the podcast network that hosts many other podcasts, including the one that Bill mentioned about sort of parenting and things. And as I always say, guys, you can like on social media and you can rate on iTunes and that sort of thing. But the thing that I really like is if people share these episodes. Not necessarily part 2 of an episode because that's a bit random. Maybe try for part 1. But, any of the show, I try and make it, the niche is having no niche. I want this show to be interesting to everyone in different ways. And there's going to be some people who are not interested in a gentleman from the Church of Satan talking. But there's going to be other episodes that I've done that people aren't interested in, such as the one that I've done about Crohn's disease with my friend Carl. Ones about streetwear or urban streetwear and things like that. There's all the sciencey ones I've done. So we've got quite a wide berth of episodes here. So if you like the show and if you want it to kind of get more traction and things, you really appreciate it. I don't have a Patreon or anything like that at the moment. So the thing to do instead of just giving money would be to share it on social media. Tell people about the show who you think will enjoy it. On a side note about the Patreon thing, I maybe will be getting a Patreon at some point. It won't be for many, many months yet because I have to figure out kind of what bonus content I'm going to do and all these sorts of other tomfoolery that goes along with it. And I am very, very busy. So I'm just going to not do Patreon for a little while and see where it goes, or see where not doing Patreon goes is exactly what I'm going now. So I'm rambling, as I always do at the end of the podcast, and I do apologise for that. Very quickly, coming up, I've got a chat with Heather Vickery from The Brave Files. I may end up releasing that one next week. I've got a 2-parter with Beth Crane of We Fix Space Junk. I've got an episode recorded with Magnus, who is a gentleman from Sweden who is a specialist in artificial intelligence to do with data analysis and digital marketing and things. And then I've got another show with Eddie Lauren, who is trying to create a new infrastructure in America regarding real estate and things. So lots of interesting guests, lots of things in the pipeline. So any usual listeners can all be excited for that, even though I don't sound as excited because I always record the intros and outros on a Sunday and it's quite late and I'm quite tired and I want to go to sleep because I did not go to bed until 2 in the morning because I was out drinking. But that's my own fault. I hope you guys all have a great week. I appreciate each and every one of you listening, especially all the way to the end, and I will talk to you all next week.